Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. It's Tuesday, October 14th, 2025, 739 days since the Hamas attacks on October 7th of 2023. The big question that's being asked is this tenuous ceasefire going to hold? Yesterday, 20 hostages were released to Israel, in addition to the release of close to 2,000 Palestinian detainees, including 250 who'd been serving life sentences. Nearly 1,700 of those who were released were detained without charge in Israel. And then 250 Palestinian prisoners were released yesterday, according to the Associated Press. They were returned to Beitunia in the West Bank and Han Yunis in Gaza. Celebrations in the West Bank went ahead despite warnings, Israeli warnings that anyone who was celebrating would be seen as supporting, quote, terrorist organizations, end quote, and celebrations risked arrest. The Palestinian prisoners, I wanted to say a little bit more about them. I mentioned them yesterday. The detainees were Gaza residents who were classified as illegal combatants, many of them, and they were arrested by IDF forces since the course of the last 2 years. They were transported with the assistance of the Red Cross from the Kerem Shalom crossing in the Gaza Strip, where they were released. Their release took place after Israel received confirmation that the 20 remaining hostages who were alive had been returned to Israel. Of the 250 who had life sentences, 154 were deported to Egypt via Kerem Shalom crossing, while 74 were released in Beitunia, which is near Ramallah in the West Bank. This was after being transported there from the nearby Ofer. Another 18 prisoners who'd lived in Gaza prior to their incarceration were transferred into the Strip, and the remaining 4 were released in East Jerusalem. In the streets of Ramallah and Han Yunis, the buses were greeted with singing. Palestinians and others had party flags, many tears. Young people climbed on the roofs of the vehicles to embrace their loved ones. Elderly women carried trays of dates and perfumed water to welcome those returning from decades behind bars. Some mothers and sisters waited for their relatives, and they learned that their family members would be deported to the Strip or to a third country. Despite the emotional overwhelm, the celebrations were subdued, partly due to Israeli threats against prisoners' family. Early on Monday morning, the government approved the addition of 5 more names to the list of Gazan detainees that were expected to be released in the ceasefire deal. One of them is Dr. Hussam Abu Safia. If you've listened to these daily updates, then you might know that name. He was the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital in the north of Gaza. He was arrested by the Israeli army in December 2024, an arrest that drew sharp and harsh international criticism of Israel. In addition, the last 20 living hostages were released yesterday from Gaza after 738 days in captivity under the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. The release took place in 2 stages, 7 hostages freed in the early morning hours, followed by 13 later in the day. 28 hostages, their bodies, remain in Hamas captivity. Their bodies are expected to be returned soon under the ceasefire agreement. On October 7th, 2023, more than 251 people were taken hostage from Israel and held by Hamas and other Palestinian factions. Over the past 2 years, I've spent some time on the Gaza border in the Kfar Aza kibbutz, and I followed closely the story of 2 twin brothers, Ziv and Gali Berman. They're both 28 years old. They were taken into Hamas captivity on October 7th, 2023. I wanted to tell you about them. They're twin brothers who lived side by side on kibbutz Kfar Aza. They worked for the kibbutz's lighting company. Both twins were kidnapped to Gaza from the kibbutz in the early hours of the Hamas attack on October 7th. In February 2025, Ziv and Gali's aunt, Maka Bidmeyer, shared that the family had received news that they were both alive. This was the first sign of life from the Berman twins since November 2023. Meyer told Khan Beit Public Radio that the family learned that they were being held in separate locations. The twins were abducted alongside Emily Damari, who was a close friend and neighbor in Kfar Aza. She was released in a previous ceasefire deal in January. Gali had been hiding with Damari in her room. She said of their kidnapping, "They took me and Gali out. When they pointed a gun at Gali, I shouted with all my might to leave him, and we were taken to Gaza, along with Ziv." Neither of the brothers were physically wounded during the abduction, but Emily was shot in her hand. 4 of the 28 bodies of those who were taken captive on October 7th were released yesterday. That was confirmed by the Israeli military. Hamas said that the burial sites of the 24 others were unknown and that they would take time to locate. The ceasefire agreement published by Israeli media acknowledged that Hamas might not be able to locate all of the remains within that time frame. And the Israeli Hostage and Missing Families Forum said Hamas is in violation of the deal and it must be met with a serious response. They urged the Israeli government to suspend the ceasefire. And already, Israel is saying, as reported by the Times of Israel, that they won't reopen the Rafah crossing, that they will limit aid, and that they're going to press Hamas for the release of the 24 slain hostages. So Israel today decided not to open the Rafah border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, which is a requirement of the ceasefire agreement. They accused Hamas of failing to stand by its commitment to return the bodies of all the dead hostages still held by Palestinian factions in the Gaza Strip. Israel said it would reduce the amount of aid flowing into Gaza as a part of sanctions against Hamas. The move follows the assessment by the Israeli defense officials that Hamas has not made significant efforts to return the remaining bodies of hostages, and amid the rising anger among their families, when the main group representing them is demanding that the ceasefire implementation be halted until their loved ones are returned. Now, we heard last week that both Israeli news reported that Israeli officials and Hamas officials were very clear that the bodies would not be able to be returned within that 72-hour time frame. So this is not new news, but the idea that it's being viewed as a violation of the ceasefire agreement is. So now what's going to happen? We don't know. World leaders, including several Arab states, the US, the UK, and Canada, met and signed a peace agreement in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, calling for how the ceasefire will be implemented. Today in Gaza, Israeli forces killed 4 Palestinians in Gaza City in the eastern Shijaiya neighborhood. The source said that they were killed when Israeli drones fired at residents inspecting their homes. An IDF spokesperson on social media said a number of suspects were identified who crossed the yellow line and they approached IDF forces, saying that the forces fired to eliminate the threat because the suspects did not turn back. A Hamas spokesperson called the gunfire a clear violation of the ceasefire agreement. In addition, Hamas gunmen last night publicly executed 8 Palestinians in Gaza, according to reports from Gaza residents today and video that was authenticated by the BBC. Hamas said the killings targeted criminals and collaborators with Israel. In terms of what's happening in other international responses, we have good indications, very good already, that countries including the US, as well as European and Arab states, will contribute to the $70 billion that's estimated the cost to rebuild Gaza. The UN Development Program official Jacob Cilliers today said that the 2-year war in Gaza has generated 55 million tons of rubble. The UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher yesterday announced an additional $11 million for aid in Gaza from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, bringing the total currently to $20 million. Fletcher said this is a critical window to get aid into Gaza before winter. The Arab states have expanded cooperation with the Israeli military. That this happened during the Gaza war. That news broke according to files that were leaked from the U.S. Leaked U.S. documents are revealing that key Arab states quietly met with the Israeli military to coordinate on regional threats, even while they were condemning the war in Gaza. Those military ties were thrown into crisis after the September strike in Qatar, but now could play a significant role in overseeing the ceasefire in Gaza. President Donald Trump yesterday at the Peace Summit in Egypt said the first steps to peace are always the hardest, and he said that rebuilding is perhaps going to be the easiest part. The U.S., Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey yesterday signed the Trump Declaration for Enduring Peace and Prosperity, which commits these nations to a future of enduring peace, but provides no specific details on the next stages for ending the war. A lot of people like the one-state solution. Some people like the two-state solution. We'll just have to see, Trump said on social media upon his return from the summit. During his speech to the Israeli Knesset yesterday, President Trump urged Israeli President Isaac Herzog to pardon Netanyahu, who's standing trial on 3 different corruption charges. Cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about this? Trump said in reference to the charges. Finally, yesterday, CMEP put out a statement in response to the release of the hostages and the exchange of prisoners. We welcomed the implementation of the ceasefire deal, but we're calling for it to be permanent. Our statement said that we urge all parties to fully honor the terms of the ceasefire agreement including the sustained delivery of humanitarian assistance, the cessation of hostilities, and the protection of civilians in Gaza and Israel alike. Every effort must be made to prevent bloodshed, to ensure that this fragile moment of calm becomes a foundation for lasting peace, for justice, and security for all. We also welcomed the convening of the Peace Forum in Sharm el-Sheikh. We were encouraged by the broad participation of nations and partners working together towards peace and just future for both Israelis and Palestinians. The engagement of the international community is critical and essential to fostering a durable resolution to this devastating conflict and to addressing the root causes of occupation that has prevented a sustainable and lasting peace to be reached. We continue to pray for all who are suffering for courageous leadership among governments, faith leaders, and civil society, that this moment of fragile hope might be turned into a sustained journey towards peace and reconciliation. Honestly, hold on to hope that this ceasefire might truly become permanent. It is so tenuous. Might God go before us, and might peace be confirmed quickly. In the name of Christ, amen.